So everybody, we're just going to give it a minute for participants to dial in. We're very excited about this webinar, and we'll be starting in about a minute. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon in I think, a very thoughtfully timed webinar with a good friend of the APMA. We are all reading the news and seeing in our own businesses that the automotive sector in North America is back to work. And in all three countries, there's a lot of similar questions and a lot of questions that are specific to those countries. While we reemerge, what do the new COVID workplaces look like? What does a COVID consumer market look like? What impact does that have on the production outlook, both in North America and around the world? Of course, we're just emerging from an unprecedented shutdown that in some ways has made the market react similarly to the crisis of 2009. But in many other ways, we have no analogy, we have no precedent. All markets around the world are shut down, and all automotive production jurisdictions are starting to either have come back online in the last month or two or are going down that path. What lessons can we learn from what's happened around the world? What cues should we take from the dynamics in those markets? Today, we have a good friend of the APMA, Joe McCabe. Joe leads AutoForecast Solutions, and AFS and APMA have been working together very closely for the last 10 years. Who better than Joe to give us a sense of what the world looks like post-COVID, to give us a sense of what he thinks the reopening stage is going to look like, when and if can we expect to go back up to full production, and then where are the critical points potentially for failure. Joe, I will dispense of the rest of the formalities. We're happy to have you here. We're lucky to have you. I've seen some of the material you're going to go through here. This is a really in-depth look. I want to remind everybody that the webinar will be available afterwards. We will circulate the link to participants. And so we have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we have a chat box. If you've got questions, and Joe is going to stay with us and do some questions at the end of this, drop them in the Q&A, and I'll come back on when Joe's through his presentation, and we'll go through some of those. Joe?
Excellent, Flavio. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure presenting with you guys. I'm going to go through this. There's going to be a lot of content, and so bear with me. There may be some eye charts as we go in, but that is because this is going to be a takeaway presentation that we welcome your feedback afterwards. Those that don't know who we are and what we do at AFS, the small commercial is we forecast every single vehicle built worldwide for the next 7 years. Who builds it, where, when, how many, down to the powertrain detail level. Usually in a non-COVID world, this is tracked on a weekly and monthly basis for our clients with a full interface. In the COVID world, we're doing it on a daily basis. So if we didn't have windows, we wouldn't know what time it is, because it's a constant 24-hour schedule for us in the last 2 months. But it's valuable information we're giving our customers really to understand, not just to be reacting to market conditions, but how we're going to come out of this thing on the restart and be proactive, because we all have to survive 2020 and in the future, just not today. We have a whole suite of tools that go along with it that no other player in the business does. So we'd love to talk to you offline. You'll see some screenshots, things like that. Again, please contact us if you have any questions. So to set the stage of what the forecast is to set the stage on the factors that have to be put into the conversation. And, you know, if I were just to take all the business plans of all the manufacturers worldwide and jam all together, the market would be 25% higher because no one believes their products can be losing. There's going to be no cannibalization. Everyone's going to build a winner. And we all know that's not the case. And what happens is that information usually trickles down the supply chain. The tier ones get solid visibility. The tier twos get less. The tier threes even less. And that optics issue in a stable world is very difficult to manage because you're trying to manage all the needs of this very complex and integrated supply chain and make sure you're not the weak link and make money at the same time. Now, a COVID situation is layered on top that changed the entire way we go to business. And now it's not about looking at the 3 and 5 year survival. People are looking at survival 2020, 2021. It's a major disruption that we all are going through. But when those same factors have to always be put in play. Number one, consumer preference and market direction. Look, you're going to find out, spoiler alert, we're conservative on the electrification space. And that's not because we want to be provocative. It's because this is what the information tells us. I've been doing this for 25 years. It's very easy to react to someone's investment of tens of billions of dollars in electrification and say, well, that must be the direction of the industry. But you have this thing called a pesky consumer on the other side that needs to buy this product. And right now, that consumer is more important to the conversation than ever before because that's where the demand comes into play. Now we have an ability versus necessity conversation. We're talking about the restart. We're talking about playbooks that each supplier or VM is trying to put into place for a safe work environment, practice social distancing, and pray to God there's not any kind of relapse. That's the ability equation. However, if the demand is not there, we can't move the metal off the lots to put new metal on it, then the necessity is going to override that. And that's going to be a really important factor over the next several weeks about how that demand factor can be provide momentum to a more ability factor in the production. Don't forget shareholder value. Most of these companies are public companies that have to serve a larger master, which is shareholder. We talk about Tesla, we talk about Elon, he comes in, he makes a tweet, all of a sudden stock moves $100 in a different direction. That's not the traditional way of doing business. So shareholder value in terms of long-term revenue is critical to success. Every OEM over the last decade and 2 decades has put more reliance on the supply chain to bring their innovations to the table. Very few manufacturers build anything anymore. The vehicle manufacturers, they rely on their suppliers to do the building. And when that happens, especially in a world like this in COVID, the reliance on a successful supply chain is critical to any kind of success going forward. We just saw a very short-term issue with Ford having to shut down because of relapse on COVID, but also because a just-in-time facility in Lear could provide products in time. Now, in a normal world, they were able to build 6 months of inventory and then supply just in time. But everyone's turning on within the same week or 2 weeks. So a just-in-time supply is very difficult, and one small hiccup disrupts the whole apple cart. It's a whole laundry list of things we like to go into, but really at the end of the day, the idea is how do you really minimize your risk and maximize opportunity? Not just about what business you have now, but what you could get, but also how do you really protect what you know and invest in critical, innovative ideas that may cost a lot of money and not put all your money in any one of those individual baskets. So that's got to be the underlying theme. Now, in a normal presentation I give, I usually walk people through the evolution of automotive, right? All the way back from Henry Ford and pre-him building assembly lines. And then we move all the way through disruption, innovation, all those shuns that are hurdles and check boxes we've seen in the industry. But the one that's most important right now is this last one, cooperation. To get out of this idea of a COVID space and get to a proper restart, everyone's got to play nice. Everyone's got to work together. You know, it's important when you talk about a supply chain, traditionally people think that's a vehicle manufacturer and supplier. I disagree. I think it's more stakeholders. It's everything from the government all the way down to consumer. And if any of those becomes a bottleneck or becomes a disruptive factor, the whole thing comes out of whack. So with COVID, you do need the stimulus from the government. You do need them to provide the right incentives to get people in safely to buy vehicles, keep them safe going forward, because there is this threat of not just a U recovery, but a W recovery, right? Commonality of processes, sharing playbooks, learning from each other to get out of this thing together. This idea of cooperation is critical. You can no longer, vehicle manufacturers don't have the ability to say, hey, supplier A, you can't provide, then I'm going to go to supplier B, because we're in a global issue going on right this second. So let's dive a little bit into the COVID impact. And what we do is every single day we are doing analysis of every plant shutdown, driving it down to the workday production at every vehicle, at every plant worldwide, and coming out with an algorithm that says, here is the impacted volume. And then that impacted volume sets our new baseline. That new baseline says, look, here is where we're at now. We still have to layer in consumer confidence, demand, everything else on moving the metal. But at a bare minimum, here's the amount of volume we're going to lose in the process. And so what we're doing is one of those eye charts, again, some to discuss afterwards. We're looking at an effective shutdown algorithm, which basically means if a plant is shut down for a day, that's an easy one. But if they're going to bring back one shift instead of two, or two instead of three, that's going to affect the effectivity of production and the productivity. And when they bring back only one shift, just getting that staff in, because there's certain protocols they have to play to get into the facility and then swap them out for a second shift, is going to further impact the productivity calculation. So the volumes are going to be continually knocked down through a series of these efforts. So we're looking at North America at a 10-week net shutdown. And globally, we're seeing a net shutdown of anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks effectively across the whole world. I'm going to show you what those numbers really mean. But what that means for North America, we're looking at 3.4 million units this year that are going to be unrecoverable. Now, that doesn't mean we're taking a pre-COVID number, ripping out 3.4, and that's our new top line. That's just our new starting point. And then we keep on lowering. So if you look at North America production right now, we're at 2.25 million units. But back in February, we're at 16.5. This is a pre-COVID world. That's how dramatic this shift has been. Globally, in a pre-COVID world, we were nearly 90 million units this year. Now we're sub 74. And the direct production impact on a global basis is 10.4 million units today. Could be 10.6 tomorrow, depending on it. We have been seeing a slowdown because we are seeing that restart going on. And again, assumptions are based on the fact that we do a monthly forecast on the numbers, but we do a daily forecast and a bi-weekly forecast with our customers on any kind of impacted volume. So we're using our last full release in May as sort of a conversation piece, but we're using our February one as an anchor because this was sort of our pre-COVID world in North America. Now, when we dive into any kind of forecasting, we have to learn a little from history. So where do we pick historically this happened on a global basis before? And 10 years ago, we're talking about the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, 2010, global impact. Now, the difference there was that was a financially based impact. It had one degree of issues. This one has a secondary. It's a health concern that is migrated into a financial. So when you add another level of that complexity to it, it accentuates and accelerates all the issues going on. But still, we have to learn. And what do we look at in history? We say, well, in the last 10 years, who took advantage of a bottom, right? There's two types of players in any kind of investment. Those that shore up and hold their money close to their vest in preparation of a downturn and safety, and those that take a flyer and say it's time to innovate. I'm going to stick out there, my neck across the line, and I'm going to start investing into my future. And if you look at that last 10 years, you look at the winner is China. China doubling in size in that 10-year period. The rest of Asia, 7 million. North America nearly adding 8 million units of production on their top line. You say, well, that's an easy story, right? But look at South America. You got a region that is geopolitically unbalanced, has major issues with their government. The consumer can't afford new vehicles. They just can't get it out of their own way. And a 10-year period have done nothing with their market. So this isn't always a rising tides raises all boats conversation. You got to make the right investments at the right time to be either that China or either be that South America 10 years from today. So we have to use that and say, who's going to really prosper at the restart? Now, if you look at the issues going on, China's first in. That means they're going to be first out, right? They're going to have the supply base. They're going to have all the things worked out after the rest of the world is trying to play catch up. And they can, again, repeat history and say the same story 10 years from now if they play this right. So from a global perspective, we started the conversation. We said, oh my God, here comes COVID. When this was early, we said, well, let's pretend there's a 4-week shutdown and we're back to normal. And in a 4-week shutdown, it means that we can have some recoverable volume. We can have the base where, okay, we still have pent-up demand out there. We still have a buyer. We're only shut down for 4 weeks. The manufacturers that come in, they're going to try to replenish that volume and they're going to recover the volume. Well, what's happening is that ship has sailed. Now we're looking more at a 7 to 10 week shutdown where you're going to have very little, if any, on a global basis recoverable volume. The idea that whatever volume was lost is not going to be rebuilt in 2020 because now they're just worrying about moving the metal off the lots now to bring new metal on. So as we go further and further, it makes it a worse and worse story. Now we can argue a couple different directions. We can say that a 6-week shutdown and a 12-week shutdown, hey, you know what? They may have an equal weighting depending on the seesaw we're on right now. May is going to be the test bed. It's going to be the month that we try to figure out the restart. Which playbook works the best, which one doesn't, which one has to redone. We just saw this week Ford having issues. The good news of those issues are they were able to respond fast. But it did shed light on a major issue. First, at a manufacturing facility with Dearborn and a couple of their facilities being hit, but then Lear, being a just-in-time supplier, hitting them and saying, look, we can't supply you, shutting down facility. Each one of these starts and restarts is disruptive to the whole conversation. So we're basically saying there's a 50% chance we can have 7 weeks, heck, we can have 12 weeks. So even after looking at the net week impact and the demand effect, we have to look at all the stakeholder investment. Who is making the right investments in the right spots? We have to look at the supply chain. Where are we learning from from our mistakes? I deal with a lot of suppliers in all the tiers, and a lot of tier 2s say the same thing. I just don't know what I'm bidding on. The tier 1 gives me information. It says vehicle X, ship it to plant Y, here's the volumes. And we help them dissect what it could be now and what they could be because it might be on a global platform. That idea of an optics has to get better. It has that information sharing has to get better because everyone in the supply chain now has sort of an equal weight into the conversation about a restart. And then obviously that restart, every time we have a fit and start, it's going to have more and more disruption to the problem. So from a global perspective, we see that North America, Asia Pacific, and Europe are basically carrying all the water in terms of plant shutdowns. Equally about in the 3 to 3.5 million units of impacted volume, strictly unannounced plant shutdowns, shift reductions in the short term. It equates to 10.4 million units of production. Now, you see how fast the volatility is, right? As I said before, in February, we were 16.5 million units in North America. Now we're 12.25. In Europe, we were in the 21s. Now we're sub 17.5. In Asia, which got it basically first, had a big dip because these are very large numbers now. We're now sub 40 million for Asia. Now, right now, we're seeing some stability. We're seeing China having some success. Obviously, we have to believe, we have to take with a grain of salt what China is going to tell us. You know, so much information you have to process, so much you have to believe, and so much you have to sort of put on the back burner and see how it really shakes out. But that's where our current forecast is for the major markets of the world. Okay, so for North America, like I said before, if you look at a 16.5 starting point, we were coming off of a 19 of 16.35. And honestly, the only reason we had an uptick in 20 because GM was going through their strike in Q4, and they desperately need to move the metal of those trucks. So we saw a quick blip in Q1 from that lost volume, not all of it, but some of the lost volume of Q4 of 19. Then COVID hits, and it's a double-edged sword for GM at that point. Okay, so back to our issues of necessity and ability. Well, you got to look at the inventory numbers. You got to look at the dealership liquidity. I mean, I'll give you a real-life example. I have a customer that said, Their parents are in Detroit. They were able to buy a F-Series and it was touchless. They ordered online. They got the best price. The only thing happened is when it delivered to the house, someone came in and said, sign this piece of paper, and they were done. Then they live in another state. They said, look, I want to buy a Jeep. And they called the dealership and said, no, we're not doing touchless. And she said, yeah, but FCA website even says, they said, no, we're not doing touchless. And it tainted the relationship. But that very one small example showed that just the communication and the idea that we have good intentions of putting good plans in place aren't always being put into place because not everyone's playing by that same exact code, that rule book. Now, we can argue that if we do have a W, where we have some sort of light, everyone goes back, and then we have states like Texas, we were talking about this before the conversation, having their biggest jump ever because they're starting to open up the borders. We have that W, that second dip is going to be worse. And we're going to be looking at a 12-week impact, which is going to take more than a whole quarter of production out of North America. So if we look at a V recovery is best case. V recovery was based on, we all restarted May 4th. Well, that didn't happen, right? It was also based on infection rates and mortality rates dropped significantly. That didn't happen. Containment substantially improved. I can give you the whole list of things that could have been the pro column that are now in the negative column. So what that said is the optimistic view is 13 million units. We still believe 12 and a quarter as the light vehicle production for North America. But the worst case, I can argue under 11. And unfortunately, they're both at a 50-50 chance of hitting. That's how fragile this restart is going to be. So let's sort of dive into the plant level detail. So this is the stuff we're providing on a daily basis. Our customers are getting it bi-weekly because it's just way too much to consume. But by every single plant in North America, I'm going to show you because we do it globally, but I'll show you North America. Here's obviously every plant in Canada, when they did their closure and when their restart was scheduled or is scheduled to be. And the good news is we're sort of on pace with most of these. But here's the estimated volume impact. This is our new top line starting point that we then take more out of. So in Canada alone, we're looking at 370,000 units of impacted volume just from yesterday. Those volumes will probably change tomorrow. The good news is we're seeing that this week, these numbers have come down significantly because we're seeing some positive movement in the restart conversation. Mexico, similar conversation, but the issue with Mexico is their restart, right? Even though they finally said automotive is an essential business, they can open, and we can open up the supply chain, it doesn't mean that the manufacturers are ready open just quite yet. And Mexico is a very important part of the calculation when it comes to North America footprint. So we're going to keep our eyes on what their effect on the total production is going to be in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and to see if these June numbers have any kind of movement. But we can argue nearly 800,000 units of just sheer volume ripped out of Mexico. And the United States goes over 2 slides. It's every single plant, obviously. There are restarts, most restarts in the May timeframe, which is good, with an impact on North America at 2.3 million units. And that's what brings us to our 3.4 in all of North America. So this one's just United States. Okay. So again, we can dive more into the conversation afterwards, but this is the level of detail. We do a bottom-up forecast, not a top-down. We don't just, hey, here's the size of the bucket, now fill it. The bucket is, the shape of the bucket and the size of the bucket is the sum of the parts. And that's why we have to look at all the level of detail and really build it up. So let's really talk about the risk analysis in North America. If we look at production of brand new vehicles slated for this year and early next year, this is going to be the short list. And the ones that are red are the highest risk of being impacted from a restart. And the ones in yellow are a little further. They're not out of the woods, but they have a little less risk because they're further out. So I'd say anything slated between now and July is high risk. And anything from September forward has risk, maybe a little less. But the real issue here is look at GM. GM desperately needs that T1XX platform. This is their profitable platform. They make their money on their trucks. But there's way too much K2XX platform vehicles sitting on the lots right now. So how do you incentivize someone to come in, buy the metal there, and incentivize them to buy the brand new truck at the same time? Right? So this is going to be a very interesting thing we got to watch for General Motors' bottom line. because this is critical to their financials this year and next year. Players like Honda saying Acura desperately needs a brand refresh, right? It's gotten stale. So they need a new TLX. Kia looking at the next Sorento and Elantra for Hyundai. The F-Series, important, obviously, right? You're going to see a lot of important products that some are going to be direct replacements and some are going to be brand new, like let's say a Bronco or Bronco Sport. Okay. If we look at the first half of 2021, and we're only doing our through June story, we're saying that the stuff in the first quarter is still at risk, and the stuff in outwards a little further, Q2 and forward, right now we're considering somewhat safe. But safe is a relative term, right? We hear of Ford saying, look, we're just not going to do the Lincoln investment with Rivian. And they're saying, well, Lincoln wasn't the right brand to do it. Well, honestly, at the end of the day, why put your money in a high risk product that's not going to pay out profitably in the short term? This is where you're going to see the shift of investment. Okay, so it's important to understand that, you know, Jeep desperately needs a 3-road vehicle to stay competitive, and yet they had to push that into 21, right? So that's a key product to them that they really need to get in there. Ford pushing that Bronco for the last 6 years, I believe, in putting that logo out, right? They finally get that thing to market, but they need a buyer. Okay, so this is going to be the tricky part that we're paying attention to constantly. Okay, so from a global standpoint, we are basically looking at a top line in 2020, right? Obviously, that's our dip. We're looking at 2016 as the high water mark for North America. We forecast out through 2027. We do not have us getting back to 2016 levels. That's not a bad thing. It's just better utilization of capacity, much less excess capacity around, building where you sell. That's a different story from 2009, right? 2009, we had a lot of plants that had excess capacity, didn't need to be building that product. Then a global financial crisis comes in and obliterates those plants. Since then, offshoring, moving things off, more manufacturing, setting footprints up here to build North America's export, building where they sell, hedging their bets, and USMCA or CUSMCA coming in to play, all critical to a better formula to the utilization conversation. But that 17 million is heavy utilization. It's not a downturn. It's just a better manufacturing footprint in building what they should be building. Okay, so let's dive into the detail of North America. North America, high water mark, as I said, 2016, 17.8 million units. A little bit of decline, but very strong market. All of a sudden, 2020 comes and the bottom falls out. Here's our recovery path. Yes, it has a little bit of a hockey stick in it, but it's a recovery that is sustainable because it is still in that excess capacity. However, we got to look at the detail. The detail says who are the players that are contributing to the drop or investment into the future. In 2020, obviously, the Detroit 3 and the Asia Pacific manufacturers took it on the chin the most because of their footprint. The EU manufacturers and the EVs are collateral damage because they're smaller here, but we're all getting hit by this issue. But as we dig ourselves out, we're going to see that there's going to be better utilization at capacity, not huge swings in volumes, but enough to fill right with the right product set. So now this idea of not just what the numbers are, but who's contributing to those numbers. So if we look at it from a country basis, we split out US, Mexico, and Canada, we see that flatness, right? Obviously, everyone's going to have a 20 dip. Unfortunately, when I have the conversation with Canada, and I always do, the dip is here. That's an Oshawa impact. That's the fact that, Windsor's coming, shift reduction, Equinox now more production of Equinox in Mexico that can carry some of the CAMI water, Ingersoll water here, things of that nature, right? We don't have anyone backfilling production yet. We're constantly looking for that player. But one of the telling sides also in Canada is the fact that you basically have two groups, Detroit 3 and Asia Pacific manufacturers. Like every other jurisdiction in North America has every player. Okay. So just something to take a look at. It's not a negative on the Canada, but we are looking to see what is going to backfill this. Our prediction always find someone outside North America. That's a separate story altogether. Find someone outside North America that wants a North American footprint. The Chinese are coming. It's not an if, it's a when. From a segmentation perspective, you're talking about that everyone took it on the chin for passenger cars. We're losing 1 million units from now through 2027. Interesting enough, Japanese market share of passenger cars goes up. right? There's still a market for a passenger car buyer, but they're not buying the Detroit 3 vehicles. They're buying marquee European and Asian-based manufacturers. So even though everyone's going to lose volume in this segment of passenger cars, there are certain winners and there are certain ones that are going to and losers in the conversation. On the flip side, I'm not dealing with SUVs. I'm not dealing with pickup trucks. I'm looking at the two big movers: passenger cars and crossovers. Okay, everyone's up, even the Detroit 3. However, Detroit 3 lose market share. They go from 35% to 32% in the crossover segmentation, right? So the telling story is, well, why? Well, look, Jeep, we build where we sell. Look at products that are sold for more than 50,000 units here in North America that aren't built here. Jeep Renegade, all come from Italy. Encore from Korea. Ford EcoSport, India. There's 250,000 units there I could justify a North America footprint on because they're sold here and not produced here. So yes, we're talking about better utilization of our plants, but the telling sign of Detroit 3 losing market share in key segmentation is something really needs to be paid attention to. Production highlights: mid-size pickups making a resurgence, Ford Ranger, Ram beating out Chevy, but we believe Colorado was part of that conversation, pulling some buyers out. Wagoneer, Jeep Wagoneer, needing that three-row competition. Volkswagen planting their flag here, obviously with the Atlas, and removing the Passat because it's not a good seller here. Using North America as an import substitution. Subaru Impreza, more Lexus products. Global export hub, Mexico's not going away, right? We still have a very strong market. USMCA, it will continue to strengthen that market because it's going to put more heavy reliance on the supply base here. But it's important that our market's going to have a nice, stable 17 million unit space. In terms of opportunity, there's the traditionals, right? I tell the story all the time. What do I can sell here in volume that's not being produced in volume? Some of these vehicles are here, like the RAV4 and the Rogue, but not all of them. A lot have import conversations. CX-5, I tell a story for years. Why isn't it produced here? Well, the Mazda CX-30 is in Mexico. It's smaller, but it could fill that gap. I still think CX-5 needs to find a footprint here. Hyundai and Kia are really doing well in this market. You're going to see more and more investment from them. New players, all Chinese-based: GAC, Zodiac, BYD, etc. Right? Those like Geely using the ownership of Volvo, known brands, as their way into a market. Chery and Zodiac using an importer for their product and building brands that are dedicated for this market. The Vantis brand, as well as Geely doing their Link & Co brand. SAIC building MG brands all over the world, getting good at it, and then finally going to migrate that we see over to North America. So this is your next list of customers to start the conversation with, because they're going to need that local supply base to satisfy all the necessary rules going forward. In terms of sales, we're going to break it up into 3 countries. Here's our sale. We break it up by passenger car and light truck, both imported and domestically built. Obviously, in North America, US, we saw a great 2009 with our 5th consecutive year of 17. Pre-COVID, we were still in that range. Current, 11.9. And in fact, that's going to be bled into the 2021 timeframe of 13.7 million. And passenger cars will continue to take it on the chin. In Canada, we basically see that high water mark in 17. We had it flat going into 19. And then current, we've bringing it down to 1.7 million units. That's going to go into 21. It's like a plunger pushing everything through of 1.76. We're not going to see 2 million units to return until late in 2026. And their passenger car market basically stays at a quarter. On the other side of that coin, Mexico. Mexico, their passenger cars stay in the high range, in 50% plus. Okay. But again, no one's going to dodge this. Now, Mexico, we don't have them coming back as best as the other regions we did, right? We come back in about 4 years to some sort of nice high water mark. In Mexico, we saw a blip in 7 and we saw a decline all in pre-COVID. Now COVID hits. We're going to see an increase, but we're not going to see that massive level of increase. We had a big buyer section right here in the last 4 years. And we believe that buyer section is going to be really what took a lot of the momentum out of the sales side. And this is going to be sort of not the stragglers, but just the constant influx, not another spike. Okay, can't talk global if you don't talk China. So again, hey, look at that. Back in 2006, 10, They were our size. Now they're double. We do not have them coming back to 30 million units. China wants to be a global player. They're going to invest in they're not going to invest in the small players anymore. They're going to make the small players become big or die off. So consolidation and attrition. Okay. The biggest risk in China, vehicle manufacturers, 125 in 2027 and 115 brand owners. I mean, think about it. Volkswagen is a brand owner. Doesn't matter if they have 4 manufacturers in China building different Volkswagen brands. They own that brand. Now add 114 more of them on top. These are unsustainable numbers right this second. So you can see a major flushing out, a major shakeup in the Chinese market because they want to build an export market, better fuel economy, better quality, better. And to do that, they're not going to let all the dogs and cats build 2,000 units a year. So electrification side, the real story is that there are early adopters and there's mass market adopters. Early adopters of the Model S, second vehicle, they don't care about high price. They want the cachet. They want the latest and greatest, the new shining object. The mass market players are the Model 3 buyers. I have one vehicle. I've been saving up for it. I can't afford to be not working because I got to get my kid to school or to the doctor. This bridge is a very difficult chasm to bridge. Tesla is a unicorn. They are a sports car company that just so has to be electrified. It is not a Leaf and it's not a Bolt fighter. Right? So you're going to see a lot of the Porsches coming out. You're going to see Volvo with Polestar. You're going to see a lot of these brands saying, we got to take them on head on. And the only way we're going to take them on is a high-priced sports car that has the coolness of electrification. 2 different markets, and that's what's going to bleed into our conservative view of the world. So an eye chart here, but it just tells a story. The story is that in 2010, 0.03% of the world had pure battery electrics. In 2009, we didn't even crest 2%. And in 2027, we at AFS are under 6%. There are many other, now plug-in hybrids are here, standard hybrids. The whole electrification suite by 2027 is 15%. Anything with electric motor. But pure battery electric, the tough hurdle. North America follows a similar trend. 0.01% in 10, less than 5% in 27. So why? Well, the dark blue and the light blue is our forecast. Dark blue is the traditional GMs getting into it. The light blue are the Teslas and the Rivians. Same thing here. The dark green and light green are their business plans that we don't believe they can meet targets on. This is all based on a price parity in 2023, which automotive speak is tomorrow. And here come all the consultants that say, well, I'm going to pick a trend. I'm going to pick a ruler. There's 2 points. I'm going to draw a line. Every 4th car, every 5th car in 2027 is going to be electric, battery electric. Great. Well, 2027 is 2 life cycles away, number 1. Number 2, you have a lot of hurdles you need to get over. We don't have a global story. We have the U.S. pushing back on federal fuel guidance. We have Germany incentivizing it because they're putting in charging stations. That's great. China doing it, but because they want to have dominance in these areas. I can argue that if we didn't have Tesla and we didn't have Volkswagen, we'd be talking lightweighting, right? Dieselgate turned the whole thing on its ear. But even if this is true, even if the optimists believe that 20 million units in 2027 are full battery electric, doesn't it mean that 80% of the market, a 100 million unit market, still needs an internal combustion engine? So you always have to keep this idea that electrification is not going to be a light switch moment. It's going to be that we're going to have it live in harmony with ICs, but it's not going to anytime soon take over the IC market. Now, the reason is in the past, a majority of the platforms were shared. I could take a vehicle, I can rip out that powertrain, its internal combustion engine, I can jam and electrify. If it sells, great. If it doesn't, I stop making that variant. In the future, we get too big to fail. Dedicated platforms that these platforms will not be able to fit an internal combustion engine. Okay? So they have to make them successful. So you're going to see this dedicated EV platform investment to the point where they're going to incentivize it and get consumers to push it. But this is going to be a very big, very tall task. In terms of battery electric manufacturers, Volkswagen's in the lead, followed by GM, then Tesla. And look at the other, which is suspiciously like the size of China. Okay. Now, number of players. Right this second, we have 115 different electric vehicle manufacturers in 27, 480 different EV nameplates. You break that up, that's 12,000 units per year. That is unsustainable profitability. Doesn't work. So you can see a lot of them get together. You can see the 20s and the 20s get together and make a $40,000 manufacturer. And the 50s and 50s get together and make the hundreds. In terms of the leaders, 6 million units of BEVs in 2027. There are only 10 manufacturers doing over 100,000 units a year. They make up nearly 3/4 of the total BEV market, but it's a very small market. Not everyone's on the same page. Renault, Volkswagen, most Chinese manufacturers, yep, I'm on board, right? I've invested. The resistance, Mazda says, look, I have compressed ignition direct gas engine. I still want to invest in diesels. I have something that works, that gets me to those fuel economy numbers. FCA, please don't buy our vehicles. We lose money on every single one of them. Their survival is based on Tesla's success in buying their credits. And Toyota, the biggest one of all, the grandparent of electrification, right? They could have rode that Prius right into the sunset of EVs and own the whole world. They said, no, we're going to go fuel cell. It's not saying they're right or wrong. It's just saying when you take a very conservatively company makes conservative decisions based on their long-term future, and they say we're going to make an investment in a different direction, and they already had the foothold with the Prius, that's a very telling sign. And in fact, the only reason they're in is because China's forced them. Hey, if you want to play here, you need your new energy vehicles, and hybrids don't count. It's got to be a plug-in or better. Okay, so I always crown off the conversation with the NAFTA Plus conversation. Every time I tell the story gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Global consolidation. Now, this global consolidation of platforms have never been more important than it is today. Because with COVID and trying to get the whole world to reboot and having supply bases all over the world trying to satisfy the same platform architecture or part or commonality, it's a very daunting task to do this on a global basis. You can't just shift production from one plant to the next because everyone is affected. So if I take the Toyota NGA platform as a crowning achievement of what it means for North America and globally, 9.4 million units will be on one platform by 2027. So if you make a rear view mirror or handle or something that's common, that's a lot of volume opportunity. But if you don't take advantage of that opportunity, that's a lot of lost opportunity. It's going to be built in every region of the world. And in fact, in 8 jurisdictions in North America alone. 2.1 million units of that's going to be in North America. That's a great story for your North American supplier. And if you have all that business, that's great. But you're also risking the fact that someone else can have the other 7 million units. So look at their build, right? Build where you sell. Here's their entire laundry list of vehicles that they build here or will plan to build here in the future. And the only thing that are sold here, not built here, Prius and Lexus models. Right? So it's about really identifying the right customer, but not just identifying the right customer, but identifying how they're globally situated so you can constantly leverage that into more business. So that brings the NAFTA Plus conversation. The NAFTA Plus conversation says, I want to know vehicles that are built here in North America and also any other jurisdiction in the world, just one other country, and it's considered global because that country may need local supply. And there are 422 unique platforms going to be built in 2027 globally. And 65 of them play in the NAFTA platform space. That's great, right? Only 15% of that are NAFTA plus global platforms. But in North America, 3/4 of the volume is NAFTA plus, meaning every 3 out of 4 vehicles built in North America in 2027 are sharing the same platform underpinnings as a vehicle built somewhere outside of North America. And in fact, this little slice here, this light green, is pickup trucks that aren't built anywhere else, right? That's nearly 13 million units of production in North America that is sharing an architecture on a vehicle in Europe, in Asia, okay? So this becomes a risk conversation for all the supply base. Am I talking to the right people? Do I have the right product? Do I have the right footprint to satisfy that customer's needs? Because what happens is that customer says, look, I get you're on the Toyota and thank you, but my Japanese supplier is willing to give me 9.4 million units of parts at a dime. And you're giving me to me at 25 cents because you have 2.1. I'm going to give them all the business, right? Huge problem of risk out of here because constant pressure on the supply base, and I'm preaching to the choir here, requires the idea that they put the onus on you. Build a better product, make it the most innovative thing in the world, and by the way, it better have razor thin margins. Okay, we extrapolate out to the world. We see that 55 million units of the world global production 27 is NAFTA plus. That's how spread out we are with commonality of platforms. Okay, and over 40 million of those are completely built outside of North America, which creates a risk. So the story is, this is our story we tell the world anyway. But now we layer on this COVID, this global issue we're all going through. How are we going to weather that storm? And how are we basically going to get out of this in such a way we're not just surviving today, but we're long-term survival in the future? And for those who want more information, check out our website. We're allowing people to sign up for our newsletter. It basically gives them this information updated. And again, I always thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to the questions.
Well, thanks for that. As always, very in-depth. I got a series of questions for you here. One of the things that you were talking about, which was always interesting to me, is you talk about the replacement of production in North America. Mm-hmm. And you talk about the Chinese dynamic. And you listed a series of Chinese players. Mm-hmm. You said the Chinese were coming. It was a question of when and not if. I want to talk about what you think the dynamics of Chinese entry into the North American market is, and maybe expand a little bit on, if you think about who's coming or what type of products are coming, which of the current OEMs have to worry about market share the most?
Yeah, good question. So less worry on Detroit 3 because they've already offshored the products that aren't being sold here anyway. And it's going to be very difficult to match them in trucks. So to match, the first step is, can I sell 50,000 units or a substantial number of units in this market first? And for them to do that in pickup trucks is impossible because of chicken tax. So that's going to be a very difficult barrier to get over. Now you got to look at the players who are in the crossover space. Everyone and their mother has 14 different crossovers to compete with. And that's a very easy market to attack because there's less and less brand loyalty out there. Very few people, unless you work for a union or your parents worked at a plant, say, I'm Ford blood or I'm GM blood through and through. A lot of people are making decisions on what they like, what they hear about, what their friend bought. So that gives a sexiness approach, right? If I see something that is head turning, I'll take a look at it. I mean, I got to give an example of a Cybertruck. I personally think it's uglier than sin, but I know people that love it because nothing Tesla builds could possibly be ugly, right? So you have a different consumer mindset. So I think that crossover space is going to be very important. Now, in terms of point of entry, think about how people got in. The Japanese got in because they said, these dumb Americans, they're making big land yachts, we're going to come in with small vehicles. And they cornered the market because they saw an opportunity. The Koreans came in because they say, wait a second, you know what we're going to do? We're going to give a fantastic warranty. We're going to give great product at a low price. It might take us a decade or two to get there, but we're going to get there. And they did it. So today's world, in terms of who's coming, electrification is a really important space for multiple reasons. The biggest two is, number one, if you build something that's pretty, people will take a look. But number two, the manufacturer electrification, when you rip out all the powertrain, you could 3D print a vehicle for all we know, right? There's the ease of manufacturing, and nothing's easy, but the easiness of manufacturing something and putting a facility in place and having a smaller supply chain to supply in the EV vehicle gives a much faster point of entry for any manufacturer who wants to plant their flag in North America.
We've got a couple questions here from participants. Joe, the first one is always a contentious one. Do you expect any more Canadian OEM plants to shutter over the next few years?
All right, so we'll go through our list, right? Let's talk the risks. We believe Honda and Toyota are loyal to the footprint, so we believe they're going to stay. We have seen over the last couple of years, last few years, a significant investment in CAMI, but at the same time, moving 2 plants in Mexico also can build Equinox and its brother Terrain. So it puts more risk. Obviously, Oshawa, we called 5, 6 years ago because The issue there was they didn't have the right product and it was built elsewhere anyway. Minivans, I think will have a mainstay in the industry, but we don't think it's going to have the volume it had before. So the idea of 3 shifts at Windsor is tough. Everyone asked the question of Brampton, whether they should stay in Halo sports cars. I think they should, because that Hemi engine's been paid for decades. It's highly profitable. They can use it in fleets. And with Camaro leaving the market, they have really one competitor with Mustang in terms of Detroit muscle. Leaving, I would put, look, I'm not saying they're leaving, but the risk would probably be if Unifor pushes too hard on negotiations, GM could say, I got Mexico from Equinox. See you later. And if you put the numbers on a whiteboard and you see what that capacity in Mexico is and how they can backfill the couple 100,000 units that are going to come out of CAMI, there's a compelling story about if you push too hard. The benefit of Canada is unique platforms. Windsor, the only place for that platform. Oakville, the only place they build Edge, right? Brampton, the only place they build the platforms for the LX, I guess, for those vehicles. So stability from that perspective, moving those plants all together, very costly. But in terms of the risk, no one's out of the woods. And honestly, Canada's always the one, unfortunately, that is bubbles to the surface at the most risk of people making decisions to move production out.
Thanks, Joe. That's that question always requires a bit of gymnastics, and pretty good at that. Another question here: What are the reasons why Mexico might not be able to fully recover or come back to their level of global production pre-COVID? We saw that dip in your graph and then not come back to that 16 or 17. Maybe you want to elucidate it a little on that.
I mean, I think the new trade agreement in place does put an emphasis, not just the part supply side, but the $16 per hour wage rule is going to see a lot more movement of that labor pool move north. So we see that, we see Mexico in a stable position. We just don't see a lot of new investment. And, on top, it's political suicide right this second to invest anything outside of the United States. Unfortunately, I know, predominantly Canadian audience here, but if you build in the US, it can be very difficult to say you're moving money north or south. So we're going to see that every manufacturer still needs a low-cost provider. That the business model does not allow for a Canada-US only 100% content. Rarely, if ever, will we see anything 100% content. Very few manufacturers meet the 62.5 right now, let alone the 75. But I think when they make that 75 and they move that needle up, you're going to see more of that backfilled in the US and Canadian space.
Joe, you talked a lot about having to move the metal. And you and I have discussed over the last few weeks, especially about the levels of inventory by nameplates across North America. And you had a couple of charts up there that listed out SOPs for the next year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that some of these SOPs will be moved forward or pushed back in order to motivate the buyers to buy these newer models? And then what do you think the impact is to a company that's got to move some of these SOPs? They're heavily invested in the new vehicle. And anyway, well, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, the biggest risk is on the supply base, right? I mean, these suppliers that put in tooling and put in capacity to build for these, if a manufacturer moves it 1 or 2 months, they can hide behind hey, it's COVID, it is what it is. We're all trying to survive. We're all in the same boat. But the cash position, a lot of suppliers that are supplying these don't have the flexibility to move things 2, 3, 4 months. So, I come back to the risk of those that are necessary replacement product and those that are brand new, right? Yeah, it's important for Ford to make the Bronco, but it's not gonna move their needle any which way. It's gonna be nice they'll have a big push because it's gonna revitalize an old vehicle, an old brand. But I think at the end of the day, the supplier who has not positioned themselves or isn't a commodity or has not hedged their bets, we told people after 9, you got to start making an investment. You got to start looking at non-automotive. If you make a part, maybe commercial products and farm equipment could use your product. Those that adapted to PPE are going to survive. But the inflexible supplier that basically put themselves in a 6-week cash position are really going to be really dire straits if any of these things move even a month or two.
A lot of these discussions where we've had pre-COVID world here, we talked about different ownership models affecting growth of different nameplates and different markets. And a lot of it was based on the idea of the shared economy. How does your view on the shared economy, shared mobility affected by the realities of a COVID-conscious marketplace?
Well, we're hearing of the potential of a new buyer, right? The urban buyer that traditionally is in the mass transit may actually come out as going, I need personal ownership. I don't want to sit next to anyone anymore. Now, that's not going to move the needle a lot, but what it's good is it adds another dynamic to the conversation. Even if it moves the needle a little bit, it's going to show some positiveness. It's not just about bringing in that buyer that has owned a car all their life and they're going to replace their car. It's about bringing a new kind of buyer. That idea of a shared mobility, I think, is going to be pushed out. We saw GM get out of the Maven investment because, frankly, investing in high risk, low return, or long-term propositions right now is not the right bet. The right bet is building what you know and making money today and eventually getting that space. So we see the shared mobility conversation is coming. We never had it as a tipping point. All of a sudden manufacturing goes away. It's way too much of it. It's way too disruptive. I mean, we're trying to just convince people to buy EVs. Now you're convincing people to split a car 6 different ways and share it. And I know my stuff. I try to keep a clean car, but it still has a lot of crap in there. I got to move my stuff from point A to point B. So it hasn't really changed our viewpoint. We weren't big takers on it moving the needle. But now we see it moving in a positive direction because of that new urban buyer that may be scared of a COVID relapse.
Probably have time for one more question. I thought we'd go back to China for a second. You showed the growth in the Chinese market post 2009, led the way. I think much stronger return than even the North American one. And you had a list of you showed 115 different brand groupings in China sharing that market. The Chinese market was the first one to collapse. The first ones to get hit with COVID, domestic market collapsed. Chinese assemblers don't typically export. Now they're the first ones to come back online. You think that affects their timelines for export into other major markets? And if so, would you pick, I know you shortlisted about 5 or 6 of them. Is there one of them that you think is particularly more advanced towards sales in North America?
It's going. First answer is yes, right? I bet you there's conspiracy theory people out there saying, first in, first out logic. They're first in, they get first out. I mean, I've heard some, and I do not believe it in any way, but it's the bank robber shoots himself in the leg saying, hey, me too, I wasn't robbing the place. And, this gives them that launching pad like we saw in 2009, a repeat. They can come in and take advantage of it. They have a government that is willing to buy into their way of global dominance, whether that is subsidizing fuel prices down to ridiculous numbers, whether it's bringing players together, whether it's finally saying, hey, Tesla, you can come in without a partner because we're going to steal your technology anyway. Come on in. We don't need partners anymore. They're going to try everything they can, throw everything they can in the kitchen sink to make sure they come out with a solid footprint of global dominance. Will it change their export model? Absolutely. The only thing that's going to change it is whoever's receiving their product. If whoever's receiving their product says, wait a second, we're going to be a little more gun shy in receiving Chinese products, whether it's through ignorance or not. That could help the other side. They can ship as many boats as they want out there, but if no one's going to take their product on, it's sort of a moot point. In terms of winners in the place, big fan of Chery because they're just their strategy. I got to find the slide. Just their strategy on right here somewhere of the designing Lincoln Co. as a global brand leveraging their experience with Volvo and Lotus, not stealing their technologies, but educating themselves on what a non-Chinese consumer is going to get. Those people making those investments, SAIC with MG, are going to be the ones. Those that come out of the brand new vehicle and say, I pray this thing sticks, it's going to be a little trickier because people are not going to put as much faith into it. But people believe that Chery has a leg up because, hey, if they bought into Volvo, they probably know something. They're talking the back end. I trust Volvo. I'm going to expand that trust and spread it on to Chery at that point.
Joe, as always, thank you. You're very generous with your time and your insight. Great partner of the APMA. This material, this webinar will be available, and I encourage all of you, if you want follow-up directly with Joe and or through us. Joe, thank you. Participants, thank you for your continued patronage of the APMA.
Thank you, Flavio. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Good luck.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.